Are you a real estate investor looking to sharpen your skills or a newbie looking to become one? You're in the right place. Welcome to Where Should I Invest? Real Estate Investing in Canada with your host, Sarah Larbi.
Hey guys, it's Sarah Larbi. Welcome back to Where Should I Invest? Real Estate Investing in Canada. Today, my guest is Luc Boiron, who is a flipper, and Luc flips in the GTA. He has done some flips in Scarborough, in Brampton, and some other areas across the GTA. I thought it would be interesting to bring Luc in, being that I am not a flipper and a lot of people may not be either, to hear about his strategies and how it differs from buy and hold. Luc is very successful and he is a few years younger than me. I knew him in school and probably met him when he was 10 or 11 years old. So just a few years back, we met at one of the investor forum events, and I was happily surprised to see that he's had so much success. In the last year and a half, he has flipped over a dozen properties, and this is his full-time job. He went to school to be a lawyer, as you guys will hear, and decided that instead of doing that, he wants to be a full-time flipper, and so far has been very successful at it. Today's episode is going to be part one of a two-part series with Luc. Please take a moment to rate the show. If you could give it a 5 stars and subscribe, it will allow other people to find it a lot easier on the search.
Hi, Luc. How are you?
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for coming. And Luc and I actually knew each other when we were kids. So we went to the same school in downtown Toronto, probably 11 when I first met you. Something
Probably,
like that.
Yeah.
And now you're a successful flipper, so that's amazing.
The world is very small.
It is. It is. I think we ran into each other at the investor forum. Was it last year?
Probably 2 years ago now, the rain event. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it's always good to see you, and it's great to see how much success that you've had. Hoping to share that with the listeners today.
Awesome.
So could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and why you decided to get started in real estate?
So a little bit about myself. I come from a big family. My parents have 6 kids, and I'm the second youngest. But I grew up in a family where my parents were very into real estate. And my father was a commercial real estate agent. He's been one now for 55 years. And I grew up surrounded by both him working as an agent on the commercial side and his investment properties. So I remember being dragged out to job sites when I was probably 6 years old to clean out. I remember cleaning out hay from a property on Bayview in Richmond Hill that's probably now worth significantly more than it was when I was 6 years old. But I was always surrounded by that, learning about mortgages around the dinner table and all that. So I was always so interested in real estate. And when I was a child, I wanted to be a commercial real estate agent, I guess just like my father. And somehow that changed. I loved real estate, but I didn't think being a real estate agent was the path for me. I ended up going to undergrad, bought my first property in undergrad. And then I somehow had this crazy idea that if I became a lawyer, lawyers must make good money. So you can use that income to get more mortgages and borrow more money to buy more real estate. Probably not the greatest idea, but I went to law school. I also did an MBA. I did a joint JD MBA at Osgood and Schulich over at York University, and ended up that I decided law wasn't the path for me. And after I articled, got called to the bar, I changed my mind and went into investing in real estate full time.
That's a pretty big jump. What did your parents say when you did that?
I think my parents, they supported me going through school, but I think they always knew I was a bit of an entrepreneur. You know, I was the kid who was mowing lawns in the summer or knocking on doors to shovel snow in the winter or starting little businesses here and there. I always wanted to do something in real estate. And I had been through school, through 8 years of university. I had bought and sold several rental properties. So I had the real estate bug that flew. And it's hard to kick once you catch it.
Yeah, I agree with that because sometimes if I don't buy something and it's already been 6 months plus, you really get that itch of needing to get back in there and buy more. So I get exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah.
So you started fairly young. If you don't mind me asking, how old are you now?
I am 27.
It's great to see so many young people being so successful. So when you decided that you were going to be a real estate investor per se, is there a specific reason why you wanted to do flipping instead of other types of investing?
The long-term goal for me is still passive real estate investing.
Okay.
How to get there and get there to the point where I can achieve financial freedom, that's really the question. And for me, flipping is my day job. I don't flip to retire because when I stop flipping, most likely I won't be able to fully continue a business with me not being involved.
Right.
However, if I can really take advantage of the information asymmetries in the real estate market, I could make potentially very good returns and use that income better than a regular day job and use that income to buy income producing real estate.
That's great. So you really get the best of both worlds.
Yes. And on top of that, as you say, best of both worlds is to flip a house, you make money when you buy. With rental property, you make money over the long term. So a lot of landlords, they look for a bit of a deal, but they buy deals that a flipper couldn't make money on.
Mm-hmm.
So if a flipper is then buying properties to rent out, they may be able to find better prices, get better deals on the properties than a regular rental investor would be able to buy.
Right. That makes sense. So what about your portfolio? What does that consist of, and how many flips have you done so far?
So before this podcast, I was just looking at some of the properties I had and I bought recently because it's been a bit of a whirlwind. My longer term holds, I have 2, and those were prior to this year or prior to me starting to flip. Since I started flipping, I'm on 15 properties.
Wow.
Yes, so that's 15 in addition to the 2 I had. Thank you.
And how long has it been since you started flipping exactly? Like how many years?
So the first property was, I would say, a live-in flip, an accidental flip, about a year and a half ago.
So 15 in the last year and a half.
Yes.
Wow. How did you do that?
Well, I went into this as my full-time job and I focused on it. Part of that is just finding different ways to be able to purchase properties where, the bank may not finance the property, but that doesn't mean you can't buy it. There's all kinds of different ways to buy properties that maybe people don't realize. And also a lot of that was, I was at a stage where I almost moved to the States to start flipping. I wrote the New York bar and passed the New York bar because in the New York, you don't need to article to get called to the bar. So I just needed to pass the bar, do a few pro bono hours, which I still haven't done. And then I could get called to the bar and not need to article. I could call myself a lawyer. Now I ended up staying because my then girlfriend, now wife, was in Toronto and articling here. So I ended up staying and seeing that maybe I could make it work here. But because I was thinking I was moving to California to flip, I started learning about how American investors do it. And there's a whole different mindset down there surrounding real estate investing and flipping, wholesaling, and buy and holds. In part, because in certain parts of the States have very low purchase prices of properties, or because of their legal structure, their privacy laws aren't as strong. You can get different mailing lists. Their foreclosure laws are very different than our usually power of sale here. So there's a lot of opportunities there for people to flip. And I would say that the flipping market or the flipping system is more developed there because it's almost easier to do.
I agree. And a lot of the podcasts and the videos and what you learn is always very US geared. And it's interesting to know the differences. And it's also interesting to speak to you because you've done the research over there and you've also done the research over here. And like you said, there's privacy laws that in the US, they don't have those same privacy laws. So for a flipper or a wholesaler, the US is probably a little bit easier. So you're going into the GTA with probably a little bit more of a challenge.
Absolutely. Not only are prices here higher, transaction costs here are higher. It's a much bigger challenge. But at the same time, I would say that for the most part, people concentrating on flipping aren't as sophisticated here, or there isn't as much sophistication in it. So if you can take some of that sophistication that American investors have learned because of their system and find ways to apply that in Canada and make it work here, you actually have less competition in the market and less competition of people doing it well. So I think that is actually an opportunity in Canada that I would have had in the States because, yes, you can get those mailing lists. You don't have those privacy laws, but the same person you're mailing is getting 15 other mailers from real estate investors because there's so many doing the same thing.
That is a great point of advice. Now, you also mentioned another piece that I did want you to elaborate a little bit more on. You were talking about mortgages and financing, and obviously with flips, you're buying properties that need a lot more work. So potentially conventional banks will say, you know what, not so much. How did you finance your properties? How did you start, and what do you like the most in terms of ways of financing?
Financing properties is a pain point for me in my business. And I use a mix here of conventional financing, A, B lenders, as well as private lending through private lending organizations like mortgage investment companies, and also private individuals who will loan on properties. The last category is probably the best one, the private individuals who lend on categories. So starting off, like I said, the first property is kind of an accidental flip. It was a live-in where my now wife bought the property using a conventional loan. Obviously, that one had the best terms for financing by far. Not only was it a great rate, I don't remember what it was, but because it was variable, it was a 3-month interest penalty. So the overall cost to hold the property for a short amount of time was minimal, whereas private mortgages have fees upfront in addition to high interest rates.
Let's talk about those fees. I think that's really interesting. It's not something that a lot of people may know about the points and all of that.
Yes. So as you mentioned, some people call it points. They usually vary from 2 to 6% upfront, and depending on if you have a broker, that may include your broker's fee. So, and in addition to that, that is an upfront fee, usually taken out of the amount advanced to you. So if you're borrowing $100,000 and you have 5 points, they're only going to lend you $95,000, and so they're lending you $95,000. So they've already taken out their 5%, but then they're charging you interest of between 8 and 12%, most likely, on that $100,000 that you borrowed, even though they only advanced $95,000. And what makes it even worse is that you pay the lender's legal fees, and the lenders don't care how expensive their lawyer is because they're not the ones paying for it. So you can budget easily $2,000 for paying for the lender's financing fee. So on a $100,000 loan, if you have 5 points, you're going to pay $5,000 upfront. You're going to pay $2,000 between purchase and the discharge at the end. Plus there are some fees that possibly that the lender may charge. So we're already at $7,000 before you charge interest. Now, if it takes you 6 months to turn around this property and it's 10% per year, then there's another 5% that you're going to have to pay on the $100,000. So there's another $5,000. So on $100,000 borrowing, we're already at $12,000 to borrow for 6 months, $100,000. 12% for 6 months is essentially the cost in that example.
Right. So I guess speed would be important then to get the flip, get it done, refinance it. Is that the goal, or potentially sell it?
On the flip, it makes sense to sell it. A lot of the fees, realistically, in a short term, if you can turn a property around in 3, 4, 5 months, that 10% interest rate isn't nearly as bad as paying 3% or 4% upfront. Because if it takes you 3 months to do a property and you paid 4% upfront, that is essentially equivalent to 16% annualized just on the fee if you needed the money for 3 months. So
it's very expensive.
It's very expensive. But going an extra month isn't nearly as bad as getting the loan in the initial fee that they charge. And what's interesting is a lot of these private lenders, the mortgage investment companies, these are pools of private individuals' money. So it would be me saying I have $100,000 or $50,000 and I go, let's say I'm an accredited investor and I go to one of these mortgage investment companies to invest my money, they would lend out my capital. Now, I believe how most of these are structured is the fees they charge up front, let's say that 3%, they keep that. And then the interest rate they charge, 10% or 9%, that would go to the individual lending them the money. So the individual is only making that, 9, 10%. It's the mortgage investment company who's making the 3% upfront, 4% upfront.
So if somebody was starting out, how do they find out about these companies?
There's a variety of them. You can Google them. Like I said, they're called mixed mortgage investment companies. In order to get a loan with most of these, you could approach some of them individually, and you may have good results if you have a good amount of time and a good portfolio, good plan to show them. The easiest, however, is just going through a mortgage broker. Now, for people who have only had traditional loans, usually if you go to a TD Bank or any of the large banks, they pay the mortgage broker, I believe it's usually 0.5% of of the borrowed amount, but they pay the mortgage broker themselves. You don't have to pay anything out of pocket. You don't have to pay the legal fees, etc. With the private mortgages, you have to pay your broker, and it's usually 1%. So that 2 to 6% I was saying might include, it might be 1 to 5% to the MIC or the private lender, and a 1% broker fee on top of that.
It's
a broker
quite
can get
expensive.
you. It is very expensive, and definitely one of the pain points. And I've had some success dealing with some private investors who have lent the mortgage amount at good interest rates, but without the fees, because they can still get better returns than they get elsewhere.
Absolutely. I am a very big proponent of that. There's a lot of people with RSPs that are just making 2%, 3%. I would prefer to use it to lend it to somebody that's going to pay me 6, 7, 8% any day.
Absolutely. You can self-direct your RSP and use that money. And in addition, I'm in a situation where I quit my job to do this full time. I have an excellent credit score, but it doesn't matter to a bank because until I have 2 years of tax returns of doing this business, they won't consider my income provable or verifiable. So I essentially to most lenders don't have income until I reach that 2-year threshold of doing this as a business.
So are there any partners or joint venture agreements that you are currently doing as you're acquiring these 15 plus properties?
Yes, I definitely partner with a lot of people for different reasons. I mostly partner with individuals for the funds. I call it the capital or the equity portion, which would be the down payment, the renovation cost, and all the closing costs around that. So I'd partner with someone for that, but I've also partnered with people who have the ability to get better financing or who are interested in working out in different ways. I've partnered with people or joint ventured with individuals on these types of properties.
That's great. So your first property, let's go back to that just for a second. You mentioned it was a live-in flip and it was kind of by accident. So can you walk the listeners and myself through how you went ahead and flipped it and what you did, how you sold it, and then how you moved on to the next one?
For sure. So in flipping, you make your money when you buy. That's really what it comes down to. I often say you make money when you buy, and then after that, you just need to not screw up. So this property was a condo in Scarborough, and this was my girlfriend, now wife, bought the property. It was brought to me by an agent I know who said, you know what, I know they want to sell quickly. It's an awkward situation. Ideally, if they can get a good offer now, it can potentially be at a lower price to take away some of the uncertainty of what will happen. So I was given the heads up that this property would be hitting the market. I was able to see it on the first day it was on the market, and we bought it the first day it was in the market. And I think there were several people interested, but we got in first and offered first, and our offer was accepted before anyone else even had a chance. So connections make a big difference in being able to buy properties at a discount. So that's part of it. This was a condo in Scarborough, bought it for $190,000. 2-bedroom, two bath, 1,000 square feet. And I'm pretty sure there had been drugs dealt out of the apartment. It was a mess. It was not a pretty place. And my wife she gets very excited about a lot of things. She's passionate about a lot of things, and real estate is one of those things that she's gotten passionate about. So she saw this property and she said, oh, we can do such great things with this, and I'll buy this, we'll live in it for a few years, and then we can rent it out after, and it'll be a great property. We can fix it up and then live in it. And so we bought this property, we start cleaning it up, and, there was cockroaches and everything in it. And it really kind of turned her off the living there a bit. And it wasn't that close to her work. So we started fixing this up, and I managed the contractors, and I helped deal with, and this was while I was still working before I went into this full time. And I managed the contractors, made it quite pretty. And I think it managed to do this 1,000 square foot condo for a little over $30,000, or right around $30,000. That's two new bathrooms renovated, 2 full bathrooms renovated, full kitchen renovated, all new appliances, new washer dryer, repainted baseboards, floors, and new lighting, and just all of the cosmetic stuff, which is great because condos, you don't have to touch the roof, you don't have to touch the windows, you don't have to touch the furnace or hot water tank or AC. That's all usually covered by the condo company. So you really have to deal with inside of the box, which can keep costs down. And you can make it you can make a 1,000 square foot condo quite nice for, around $30,000 potentially if you have a good handle on renovation costs. So managed that renovation and then listed the property for sale, realizing, we decided we didn't want to, stay living there. And so we had a good idea that we fix this up. It's worth a lot more now. Let's see if we can get a good price for it. I think I'm trying to remember we listed for, but it was probably around $250. And in 3 days, 2 or 3 days, we sold it for $285.
A good, nice little profit.
Yeah. After everything, I think we're probably about $35,000 to $40,000 after all of the costs.
And how long was that? Within what time frame?
3 months.
Wow. So what was next?
Next, I was still working, so it wasn't immediate. And we went with a house, and a few interesting things with the house, but it had been, I think it was originally a 3-bedroom house, and the previous owners had converted it to 4. But overall, it was a good house. It was just far north in Brampton. And I bought that house. That one I held a little longer, but we lived there, worked on it a bit ourselves, and also hired contractors to renovate. And probably within 6 months, sold it for pretty good profit on that as well. And that was about the time when I was finishing articling. And when I was kind of doing this and saying, you know what, maybe at the time I was still, at that one was supposed to be for us to live in for a while. But at the time I was finishing articling, and I said, you know what, this looks like this could be a pretty good business. Why don't I sell this, take the proceeds, and get into flipping, doing this as an actual job. And luckily, I was doing this starting at a time when the market was still going up a lot. So not only did I think I bought right, but also the market was carrying it up even further. So the difficulty is finding deals. So after I finished my articling, which is essentially an internship to become a lawyer. So I got called to the bar. And shortly after that, real estate was my full-time job. I was going to be flipping. And I was lucky to have a family member who was going to be also investing additional capital with me so I could do multiple properties, at least for the down payment portion. So I set up some corporations for those purposes, and I started looking for properties. And I think I'll give you the background on the first property I bought when this was my full-time job.
Sure.
So this was a semi-detached house in Brampton. And I love the story of how I found this property because it was such a coincidence. It was so much luck, and there's a lot of luck to it. But at the same time, you get lucky when you put yourself in a position to be lucky. So I happened to be looking at the public MLS, Realtor.ca, and I had been keeping an eye on prices of houses in Scarborough. I'd been looking at stuff. I saw this one property on the MLS, and I didn't know if it was priced for multiple offers or not, but it looked a bit run down in the photos, and I thought I'd take a look. So I asked my agent to send me the full MLS listing. And he said, I can't find it on the MLS. And what we realized was that because it was on the Toronto MLS, or he was searching on the Toronto MLS, and this property was cross-listed from a different city outside of Toronto. So it wasn't on the Toronto Real Estate Board, but it was showing up on the public MLS because that covers all of the real estate boards. And the situation was this was right before Thanksgiving weekend, and the agent had listed it in her MLS area. And the process there was listed on her MLS and then cross-listed to the Toronto Real Estate Board. And what happened was that didn't end up happening on the Friday. There wasn't enough time at the end of the day. So it wouldn't show up on the Toronto Real Estate Board website until the following Tuesday because it was a long weekend. And I think I noticed the listing on Saturday or Sunday. So we were able to get in to see the property, I think, on Sunday, and offered on Monday night to see it. Offered on Monday night basically saying, look, this is the price we're willing to pay now for the property so that there is no competition. Let's do a deal now. And I think they were happy to get an offer so quickly because they had zero interest yet. Because all of the alerts that get set up by agents for particular areas, in Toronto, those alerts are based on the Toronto Real Estate Board. So since this property had not yet been listed on the Toronto Real Estate Board properly, it wasn't showing up on those alerts. So I guess in the first few days, they had next to no interest because agents don't look at the public MLS to see the properties. So I think it was listed for $425, probably would have sold at $440, $450 had it really had proper exposure to the Toronto Real Estate Board and had time to get to multiple offers. And I offered $415 and it was accepted.
And that is huge, right? I mean, even if you have a realtor that helps you, just doing that extra due diligence and just checking yourself got you that deal, and great on you for taking that step and not necessarily always relying on a realtor to send you deals, but to actively be searching. So that's, like you said, you create your own luck by being diligent.
Exactly. And I was also lucky at the time because I could recognize that this was a good price because I had been searching in Brampton, in that area. So I had an idea of what things were going for. And I often say to new investors who ask me, so one of the ways to start is to get to know a particular area or building and get to know every time a new house, you can get the alerts set up by agents. Every time a new house or condo unit or wherever you're searching comes up on the market, you can see what there is so that when a deal comes on the market, you can recognize it.
Absolutely.
Just like I know you are an expert in Brantford. So if you see a property listed at a good price in Brantford, you would know that is a good price.
Absolutely. I check daily, and I will check on the MLS. I will also check on Kijiji, and you might do that as well. But just sometimes it's for sale by owner, and it's on Kijiji, and you can scoop things up if you're fast enough.
Absolutely. When you don't need to negotiate through an agent and you can negotiate directly with the homeowner, that makes a big difference.
So this property that you purchased, what did you need to do to it to flip it, turn it around, and make the profit? And what do the numbers look like?
So that property I bought for $415 on November 23rd of 2016. That was the closing. I was actually on my honeymoon when we closed, and I signed all the paperwork before coming back. Bought before leaving, and so we were able to close while I was gone. And I renovated that property. We did new windows, refaced some of the outside. It had a bit of a two-door style, so it kind of capped the aluminum. And then I did new floors throughout, new kitchen, renovated all the bathrooms, painted the walls, baseboard, doors, really all cosmetic. We didn't take down the drywall, change the light fixtures, but really just cosmetic. Scrape the stucco on the main floor to give it smooth ceilings. So a full cosmetic flip to make it look pretty cost about $67,000.
And what did you sell it for?
So I sold it with a closing on March 31st. So that's just over 4 months. 4 months and a week, I would say, from the purchase closing. And I sold that for $620.
Okay. And then when you factor in all your financing fees, et cetera, like what do you think your profit on that was?
Profit was about $85,000. And okay. I split that with my equity partner. So I made about 42.5 and my partner made about 42.5.
Good. So, I mean, one of the things too that you mentioned a couple of times was your wife is passionate about real estate. And I would say that is amazing to have that support as well on your side. So what did she say when she saw this one?
I think she liked it. We were talking today about who it was who found it. And I think it was me who found it, but she regularly sends me properties as well.
Okay.
And she's a huge help because although I have a lot of people I work with, a big team, the decision-making really comes down to me in the end. And I'm the only person working in my company at the moment. My wife is a huge help because there's just a million decisions to be made. And it's so nice to have a sounding board who you trust, whose opinion you trust to help you make those decisions or advise you on those. So she's a huge help both in finding properties, but also in anything from how to deal with a particular investor or what tiles to pick for the finish, because I am constantly tweaking the finishes of the properties. I try to do a very standard finish.
Okay.
I try to source things that I find have a nice look, but are a very good price for that look and goes together with the look I'm trying to reach in the house. And it takes a bit of tweaking, but you'll see most of my flips, if you were to see pictures, kitchen cabinets are the same. I use the same quartz countertops. I'll use the same vanities. I mostly use IKEA vanities. I'll buy tiles from the same place. For the most part, they'll be relatively similar from a clearance place that seems to have a ton of particular tiles that I like. And so you'll see a lot of similarities in the properties, consistency in the paint colors, consistency in the flooring that I use. And I tweak it a little bit for the price point of the finished property that I'm going to be dealing with. But overall, it helps to really think deeply about what do I want to use on this property once, and then hopefully in a pinch I can just use the same one on the next property because I know I've already thought it through and it already makes sense.
Yeah, and you probably have a lot of extra paint or tiles and you can keep that for the next property. It just makes more sense rather than having to keep those in the back of your garage or throw them out when you've got a few feet left. At least you can reuse them in your next one.
Absolutely. And certain things like certain things that you're always going to be buying, like light fixtures, for example, can make a big difference, but they can be so expensive. So when I find light fixtures on clearance that are a nice look that I like, if they're a good price, I might stock up and buy 10 of them or 20 of them so that I'll have them, and I don't need, if I can find one that I like for $30, instead of spending $100 on it or $200 on it, I'll stock up and buy 10 or 20 of the ones at $30.
So that's a really good idea. Now, are you doing this by yourself? Are you a general contractor overseeing the properties as they're getting renovated? How are you setting that up?
I try not to do any of the work myself. When I did my first rental properties in my undergrad and in law school, I did do quite a bit of the work myself. And I think that was a huge advantage for me because I learned what needs to be done. I learned how to. Actually, the first contractor I hired to help renovate my first rental property, I ended up working for him, renovating basements in my summers in my undergrad to make some extra money. And so I learned so much about the construction side. It actually helps quite a bit to understand, both in order to price out what I think things are going to cost, but also to just understand what the contractor is doing and make sure I can instruct them properly on what I would like done. So I hire a general contractor to do the project, but I also hire out particular subs that I will use for certain things. So I have a window installer that I use regularly. I have a kitchen cabinet installer who's done more than 10 kitchens for me. I use the same quartz countertops people. If they give me good prices for the repeat business and they prioritize me over other customers when I need something done quickly, then I'll be using them often. And so I have a lot of repeat people like that. I have also a tiler and an electrician, plumber. So there's certain people on my team that I can bring into the job in addition to the general contractor, but I need the general contractor there to kind of help manage all the process and also just finish out all of the details to make sure everything's done. Everything ends up getting finished fully. So I'm not there because, I have to straighten out switch boxes at the end or because nobody grouted or any of those things. I don't want to be there on the night before the pictures are coming, trying to grout the backsplash. So I do have a team of people, but there's always has to be a general contractor that's kind of in charge of finishing the project.
Right. So you hear a lot of horror stories, and I've experienced some myself with contractors and hiring the wrong contractors sometimes, and some of them do shoddy jobs. It sounds like you've got a great team set up. How did you find them? Was it referrals? So it's a constant process, in part. In finding them, it was actually funny because I hired someone off of Kijiji just kind of as a labor helper because I was helping my mother-in-law paint something. I said, I don't want to be doing all of this myself. I'm going to be here all day. Let's hire someone to help out. And it turns out this young guy who's just getting into contracting, been working with his dad for a while, had a bit of time off. And he's like, you know what? I don't want to be sitting around. Let me make a little extra money. So he came out, he painted for me a bit, and he turned out to actually be quite a good contractor. Wow.
So, he doesn't work for those rates that he did just that one random day, but he actually turns out to be very responsible. And now his prices are kind of getting a little too expensive, but right now I have a crew of him, his brother, and his father, who work as my job. So it's his company that's the general contractor with his father and brother. And they're my general contractors on the site. But they're not my only ones because I have several properties on the go at the same time, and they can only handle so much. So it's a constant process looking for new contractors. And I'm afraid of the day that I will have to replace him as my main contractor because I really like the guy. But there's this thing with contractors where you have really three grades of contractors. You have the guy who's going to work for, cash and a pack of smokes. Maybe, he'll ask you to go pick up a 6-pack of beer for him at the end of the day with the money you're paying him. That has happened to me more than once.
Wow.
So it's not a strange
not
thing.
Uncommon.
Yeah. You have the other guys who are going to come in and quote something, like a bathroom for $40,000. You can't make money using those people, obviously. And I'm sure they do very good work for the most part, and you don't really need to supervise them all that much. So that would be great, but they just charge way too much. So you have the low end, you have the high end, and then you have the middle of the line. These are the people where maybe you need to supervise a little bit more. The work is maybe not perfect, but their price reflects that. And so it's a good price, good value really for the work that they do. And that's the middle of the line contractor that you want on flips. And I would say on rental properties as well. The issue with that is that these contractors are always moving. The middle of the line contractor never seems to stay the middle of the line contractor. They're either going to get more expensive or their work's going to get worse. For some reason, they never stay. So what I'm experiencing with the good contractor I have now is his prices have been going up on every job. And I'll use him as long as I can, but there will be a certain point when he'll just be too expensive and I'll have to replace him.
Probably as they're getting busier and busier, then they feel like, well, I can be a little bit more picky now and raise the prices.
All right, guys, so we are going to pause here today. This is going to conclude part 1 of 2 of a 2-part series with Luc Boiron on flipping in the GTA. Part 2 next week. It has also some great content, and so feel free to tune in. See you next week.
Thanks so much for listening to Where Should I Invest with your host, Sarah Larbi. Make sure to listen in next time. We'll catch you on the next episode of Where Should I Invest?